And the Pentagon has placed about 1,500 active duty soldiers on standby for a possible deployment to Minnesota. Defense officials say 2 Army infantry battalions based in Alaska have received prepare to deploy orders. The president threatened last week to invoke the Insurrection Act to put down protests. The rarely used law would allow active duty troops to perform law enforcement duties.
Historically, the Insurrection Act has been used for really large-scale violent riots, usually race riots or labor riots or slave rebellions. Those were the kind of reasons that presidents typically invoke the Insurrection Act. What's going on in Minnesota doesn't seem to have risen to that level, at least at this point.
On Friday, the president appeared to walk back his comments, telling reporters he doesn't think the Insurrection Act is needed right now, one day after Minnesota's governor pleaded to turn the temperature down.